Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session where we're going to talk about job hunting insights. And this is on June 19th here in Singapore. And I couldn't think of better four folks to share the stage. I've got to know Clarissa over the past year, Mark over the past couple of years, Lionel just over a year and a half, and Sumantha more recently as well. And all of it has contributed to my own learnings about my own career and how we can actually delve in deeper into finding new ways of what kind of jobs could be contributing to our own lives, but also great job hunting insights, but even some folks here hiring managers. And so I'm going to be turning over to Clarissa, but just want to say hello. Chris Fong, run the ex-Google community, but we've expanded, help others who've never worked at Google under entity called Keep. Looking forward to sharing more in future sessions. But again, thank you, Clarissa, and all our panelists for jumping on and sharing the up-to-date things that you've learned about job hunting. Thank you. Clarissa, over to you. Thank you for moderating this session.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Clarissa. I'm based in Singapore. I'm currently the head of people at a startup called Endowas. We are a wealth management platform supported by tech. I previously was at Salesforce and at Google, so worked in big tech, always in the people and talent function. I've been supporting Xoogler and Key on some of these panels for this year, so I may or may not be a familiar face, always talking about job hunting, tips and tricks, and interviews and how to ace them. So I'm really glad everyone is here today. I have three wonderful gentlemen joining me, Sumant, Lionel, and Mark. I will leave them to introduce themselves, but I'm just really excited because I think this is the first time we have a group of folks, at least at something I'm facilitating, that are Google adjacent or ex-Google. So we look forward to some very interesting stories, pointed tips, and straight up feedback. And always welcome questions in the chat and feedback as well. So over to you, Lionel, why don't you kick off?
Thanks so much, Clarissa. Hi, everyone. I'm Lionel. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. So for myself, I've been in the tech industry for the last 16, 17 years. So always been in tech, right? I started in HP, moved over to Salesforce. I was in Google for 10 years. And then, I got hit by the layoffs, took a year's break, and now I'm at LinkedIn. I've been here for 3 months.
Okay. Thank you. Mark, why don't we go to you?
Hey, everyone. So yeah, I'm Mark. I have lived here in Singapore for now almost 11 years, which, as I say, that still surprises me. Originally from the UK, spent some time in Australia. I think to sort of summarize my story and how I ended up, how I'm like sitting here on the panel, I helped about 13 years ago, a small private company in the UK expand out their APAC operation, which was great fun, building new markets, building new offices, and kind of going and learning all about this incredible region that is APAC. And one of my big struggles or challenges, though, was I had this burning desire to get into tech. It was more of a traditional company. I really wanted to get into tech. And I went on that journey for many years, trying to get noticed by big tech companies and get noticed by recruiters, as I was looking for possible roles. I ended up moving to Stripe, which was just a phenomenal experience. I was with them just under 3 years, helped set up their enterprise business and also their Greater China growth business. And then saw a fantastic opportunity, another tech company called AlphaSense at a slightly earlier stage, and moved to them to basically combine the experience of setting up a new office here in Asia and work in a fast-moving tech company like AlphaSense, which is in the AI space. And here I am at the moment, just building out the office. We've gone from about 3 people when I joined to 48 as of today, in the space of kind of 5 months. So really happy to talk about those experiences.
That's awesome. Thanks, Mark. And last but not least, Sumant.
Hello, hi everyone. First of all, thank you for having me on here. Like Chris mentioned, I joined the Xoogler group as well just earlier this year. So where I started was from the semiconductor industry. I was in the tech side of the house when I started. And I like to joke saying that I took the scenic route to where I am right now. Right now, I work as the director of HR for a quantum computing company called Horizon Quantum Computing. It's what you'd call a deep tech company. What Horizon is trying to do is build a software stack to actually work with the quantum hardware. So it's a very interesting space to be in, and I'm happy to share more about that later. Before that, I was at Google for 8 years, did a few different roles, the largest chunk of which was in HR. Clarissa and I used to work together on one of the teams, and then a lot of pain brought a lot of us together in that phase, but even later beyond that as well. The Google layoffs happened between the September to December phase. That's when I was impacted. And then we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, a little later. And then I eventually started in March this year. So yeah, so back to you, Clarissa.
Thank you. I'm going to ask some really kind of pointy questions, so I appreciate your vulnerability in advance. But Lionel and Sumant, you both mentioned that you were impacted by the layoffs. And Lionel, you mentioned you were kind of out of a job for like 12 months. What was going on? Like mentally, physically, at home? What was that like?
Yeah, it was actually 13 months.
Hmm.
So I think when it happened in 2023 Feb, we were part of the very first waves, right? But I think because my US team was impacted, so we kind of saw that was coming. I think that came around January. So my team pretty much knew like most likely something was going to come off. Of course, we were hopeful like, oh, maybe not. Right. So when it actually came, I think it wasn't too much of a shock in the sense that we kind of saw it coming, but it definitely was a shock to the system. Just having been in Google for 10 years, and then you're like, oh, this is real, like it's happening, right? I think for me, my initial take was I wasn't ready to go back into the workforce just yet. I was like, okay, the universe is giving me a sign, to take a break, and with the severance, being in Google for 10 years, right? It was good. Like I could not even complain around anything from that. So I decided to just take that break. I of course like looked a little, like kind of like people are just so amazing, right? Like everyone reaches out and they're like, hey, maybe you need to speak to this person, maybe you can this person can help you, and you almost feel bad to say like, oh, I'm not really looking now, because like people are so nice. So I had some of those conversations, some advanced a little, but nothing like I was really that interested in, and some things didn't kind of pan out. And there was maybe 3 months in, and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm just gonna take a longer break, right? I was interviewing here and there, and I decided if I spend so much time interviewing, it's almost like it's a day job, right? So if I gave myself like a longer time where I don't apply, and then really just intentionally say that's the break, I think that ended up kind of like feeding me. So I traveled, I did coaching, like did a road trip to Malaysia, like drove up to Penang, came back in like 2 weeks, like stuff that you wouldn't do, I guess, if you didn't have that much time. I tried to swim like 2 to 3 times a week. So that kind of just all build up into what that year was. So definitely initially a little bit apprehensive, but I think, the package and also just being prudent with your finances helped me make that calculated decision of like, no, I actually do want to take a break. And I think I can afford a break if I kind of define that period for me. Yeah, so that it's a little bit of my spiel of like the journey of where I
So
was.
when was your inflection point? Like at what point you're like, okay, break is done, let's go back at it.
Yeah, I think the inflection point for me was I gave myself initially 6 months, and then later I was like, oh, actually, let me make it a year, right? Because I was going through some interviews that I didn't make it through to the final stage. And I was like, oh, instead of getting disappointed and then going back in, I was like, okay, let me now just take another 6 months. And that was when it was like a real break for me. And it was only like December last year that I started to look November, December, and like nobody was responding to me. And I was like, is my profile so crap? Like, do people don't even want to talk to me? So I was like, okay, you know what? Maybe it's Christmas, it's the holidays, nobody's speaking. I was like, okay, so I didn't bother too much about that. And then come January, right, like I started to apply more, and then more recruiters were starting to come back and reach out. And at one point I was going through like 5 simultaneous conversations, and that's actually how Clarissa and I met, but that's another conversation for another day. But yeah, so that kind of just led into a role in February that I signed this year. So actually, I only really looked between January to February. So I think timing was important.
Yeah, so timing. I would love to hear from all of you, like especially now you're at new companies, what you're hearing about the market. Actually, let's do that. What are you seeing? Okay, that's really interesting. I never thought about that. But yes, definitely catch the companies when they come in early,
Yes.
and be the first boots on the ground. Sumant, you know, I think deep tech is part of the trend as well, right? There's AI, there's deep tech. It's part of the industries where people are investing in. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you ended up in this role? And because you know, an HR director, and speaking as someone who has been with you for part of the journey, you know, we've been in recruiting together. You were in ops, you were a software engineer, you were a SWE, and then you kind of pivoted to HR director. Like, how? Talk us through, like, how did you convince them that, you know, you weren't just solely focused on, you know, recruiting, and now you can actually expand? I think a lot of us try to pivot, but some of the companies are very fixated on, no, you've done this, so you can only do this. So would love to hear from you.
I think that's a very interesting one, right? And I think that's a shift and acceptance that I'm seeing more lately than I have seen much earlier. Like in some of my past shifts in roles, when I made a shift which seemed too drastic, then I would be met with things like, what was wrong? Like, weren't you able to succeed in your previous role kind of thing? Or it was always a couched question, which meant something on the lines of, maybe things weren't working out well for you, so that's why you decided to change, right? So that has changed, I must say, because I think there is a bigger onus now on transferable skills than there used to be a few years earlier. And I think that leads to the other question of like, how can we also identify those transferable skills ourselves versus somebody else telling us what those transferable skills are, right? Like, I think it happened to me initially by chance, but then I tried being very deliberate about it in all the shifts that I made. So for the first 12 years, even with the tech roles, like I did a couple of different roles within the semiconductor industry. And then I decided I wanted to try something different. I had challenges, but I wanted different challenges. And then Google happened. And in Google, I joined Trust and Safety. That was my first role in Google. And in Trust and Safety, it was running operations, working with the search engineering teams and so on. So that was pretty exciting. And then after doing that for a bit, and this was where it was a little bit of serendipity, right? Like I looked at, okay, I like doing operations. I like doing a lot of these things. And are there other skills that I could build on? And Google is this fantastic place, right? Like where you can actually use your transferable skills to your advantage. And there's a lot more openness than outside Google, right? Like I'm sure there's like, I speak of Google because I know of Google, but I'm sure there's similar stuff in other big tech companies as well, right? So then I said, okay, so there are some skills that I like. And I liked working with people. I liked working with trying to create more impact and so on. So I saw this role in people ops, HR, which I really liked. And it allowed me to build a team from scratch. And I found that really intriguing. And that was something that I really wanted to build on as a skill for myself. Like I could do operations, so I knew I could do that part, but I hadn't built a team from scratch. So that's how I took that role. The next role was trying to build a team from scratch during the pandemic. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to get that kind of an opportunity again. Hopefully I don't, like, hopefully we don't have another pandemic of the same scale. But that was an opportunity I didn't want to let go, right? So that led to another role and so on. So I think all of that built over time. And when the layoff happened, it sort of prepared me in the sense that I had that muscle of adaptability built in. So I could identify what the transferable skills were. More importantly, I knew what I didn't want to do. So I knew what I wanted to do, I knew what I didn't want to do, and I knew what I could pitch myself. So that gave me a few options. I could try and see if I wanted to do something in product management, or if I wanted to go back to some of the tech roles that I did and so on. And I think some of the background really helped me with this role, because when I had these initial discussions for this specific role, having had a semiconductor industry really helped me do the research that I wanted to do about the company and also talk the same language. So that was one part of it. Then being a small company, bringing extra skills to your role is very helpful. And that was one I was keen on, to not go back to big tech. I wanted to be in a startup, be in something that was meaningful. And so, because eventually it also meant that I had to take a pay cut. Like, I'm sure we'll talk about some of that as well, but it also meant I had to take a pay cut, but I was okay with that because I looked at it from this perspective of thinking, okay, like what Lionel spoke earlier as well, this is maybe the universe giving you a sign, right? So if the universe is giving you a sign and you're not listening, so maybe there's something to it. So if the severance has given you a little bit of padding, take advantage of that, right? So you could use that and say, it's okay to take a pay cut, but I'm going to build on what I want to do right now and what I want to learn on and so on. So to back to your question, Kalesa, I think some of that really helped. While I keep making light of it by saying it was a scenic route, I think it also helped in the sense that you build that muscle and also try and see where you can contribute more. And I'm sure I'll be pulled upon to like maybe contribute to other aspects of it, which I'd love to do. And more on that later. Yes, back to you, Clarissa.
Okay. So what I hear is it's really all about timing, right? That's the common thread that I'm hearing. And I'm hearing a lot of resilience, not giving up just when things look like they're not working out, because it might not work out for a reason. I know right now we're all in jobs, so it sounds like, yes, we should trust the universe, and everything is, woo-woo and spiritual and crystals and energy. But part of it does make sense, right? So let's see if we can provide folks here with, tactical tips and useful tricks on what we can do either to find a job after getting laid off, or have a pivot. Maybe they're doing something that they don't really like to do, and find something new. So, given that even Mark, AlphaSense is relatively newish,
Yeah.
right? Can you share a creative or creative example or a strategic approach that you had to any job?
Sure.
That you've
Yeah, there's probably an interesting angle here. If I think about how I moved from Mintel, who no one had heard of, and I needed to explain the name 3 times, to go to Stripe, which a lot of people had heard of. I guess a few things, like a few tactics I used. So one was how I framed the opportunity is the first thing, which was I thought about this, like the package, what this would be worth ultimately. And I thought about this in the sense of, well, if this was a game show and this was the prize on offer, what would how far would I go in that situation? You're watching shows where people are like standing on poles for 3 days for like a certain reward. So I was like, if I frame this as this is a fantastic opportunity and I need to throw everything at it, that's going to change my mindset of how I go about approaching this versus, let's just try my luck. I was also aware, and in the conversation I had with Paul, who runs the region, I said, you're going to see much better CVs in front of you than mine, but these are my strengths, and these are what I think I can bring to it. And ultimately, it's around like the hunger I'm going to bring to this role, because I felt that having succeeded in a brand that was relatively unknown, working for a brand that was well known would be a bit of a superpower for me, having been able to succeed there. So I framed, I guess, my what I felt made me unique in that process amongst other candidates quite clearly to Paul. I then thought about it. I got some advice from a coach who basically said, treat this like new business. So how do you go about enterprise selling? You multi-thread, you research, you So when the rounds were put together, I know it sounds quite extreme, but I researched every person I was meeting. I found a mutual connection. I reached out to the mutual connection. I got them to get in touch with the hiring manager that I was speaking to. If they wanted to put in a good word, fantastic. I spoke to customers of Stripe and who were my people I knew, and they got in touch and showed up for me. So my network became really, really important. I also found out about this opportunity through a sales group called Pavilion, where someone sort of posted the role, and that's how that all came to fruition. And I guess the attitude I took was, I can just show I want this more than anyone else in this process. Like, that's all I can do here, because there will be better CVs going forward. And I think thinking about how I look at candidates and vet candidates, if someone is like showing that level of hunger and desire to get a role, and following up and doing those little things that stand out, whether it's how they follow up after the meeting or someone getting in touch with me, those things stand out, because you're right, it's like a sea of noise. And the number one thing you cannot coach or create is like desire and hunger in someone. And I think there is a trap where I then went wrong is at Stripe. And I was going for other roles, you come a bit blasé because the name carries a lot more weight. So you're like, oh, hey, I'm Stripe, and everyone kind of gives you a slightly easier pass through. So I didn't bring that same attitude into the AlphaSense opportunity. I was like, well, let's kind of weigh this one up. And they called that out to me, which I loved. They were like, hey, we're like not seeing necessarily that you want this. And they were right. And I had to like really think through whether I did. And then I just went for it in the same way. So I just saw a chat come in from Anna of like, how do you know which ones to go for? I had like my criteria of what was important for me, which I can bore you with. It was very specific to me around, I wanted to be kind of first in seat for a larger company. I wanted to grow out the region, have the opportunity for growth. I wanted APAC to be a massive focus versus just like a side hustle for the business. And I wanted to be in a space that I felt had longevity, and I feel AI has that space. And the final and most important thing was I wanted to find impressive leaders to work with that I felt like be an environment where I felt I could learn and be challenged a little bit. And once I went through and I realized that this opportunity ticked all 4 boxes, I went for it. I felt the same thing when I saw the Stripe opportunity as well. And I think knowing your criteria beforehand should be a strong indicator of like, just go all out for it. But my view is like, there's no point like half-assing it. If you're going to go for it, you might as well like fully go for it. And the worst case scenario is you have to have a choice to make at the end of that process. So yeah, that's sort of how I've gone on this journey a little bit.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Mark. That was incredible, because I think you're right, the amount of work that you do beforehand, research, preparation. I was actually just talking to a colleague of mine, asking him, how did you get to a startup like Endawas? Like, no one's, it's relatively well known in Singapore, but it's still a startup. And he said he even called the customer service line before his interview and pretended to be a customer just to see how his concerns would be addressed. And I think that level of research and that level of due diligence when you join a company is incredible. I don't think we do that. I don't think enough of us, we do that enough.
Yeah, it just shows care. It's a huge indicator to the hiring manager of like, this person cares, like they're thinking about this beyond just doing what's required to get through the process.
Yeah. I have a question for the rest of the panel as well. Maybe we'll start with Lionel. How did you find your LinkedIn role specifically? And, did you go on LinkedIn or did you know someone? Like, how did you get connected to this opportunity you're at now?
Yeah, I'll give you a bit of a detour answer, kind of just addressing the initial part, right? So like my very first approach to job hunting was I was only looking at like one company, and then I went through like 9 rounds, and it took like 6 months, and it didn't work out. And that's when I was like, oh, I'm exhausted. I want to take a 6 months break. Right. So I think my learning from that was, it's really hard to look for a job if you're doing it sequentially, because if one doesn't work out, you kind of start again, you go. So I think the biggest learning from me was like, now how do I take that learning and how do I build that into a process? Right, so what I started to do was then I I decided, okay, let me first look at what is my criteria, right? Back to Mark's point. So my criteria became, I was speaking with some startups and I felt like they couldn't quite pay me at where I needed to be, just to put it very bluntly, right? So I was like, okay, family man, I've got, family of 4, so breadwinner. I was like, okay, as much as I really like to, I get some of the vision and where some of the passion might be, I think I have certain criteria now that say, okay, roughly I'll need to be within, an established larger company. So that became one of my criteria. And then I realized if I only went by the role that I wanted to do, that also starts to pigeonhole me into like what I thought I could do, right? But because Google's trained us to be such good generalists, I decided to then use my second criteria as like, okay, which are the companies that are a little bit larger, but not necessarily too large, that I'll like to go and look for. And then what I did was I put them into a spreadsheet, right? And so LinkedIn was up there. There were a whole bunch of others that I did. And what I did was I went to the career page for each of those companies, and then I put them into like a Chrome browser into a folder, right? So every morning I would then refresh that folder. I would open all tabs and there would be like 50 companies of tabs that opened. And then I would look at that company and I would look at the role that was there. And I was like, could I do that? Could I do that? Could I do that? Right? So most of the time, nothing really hit, but there were a few that hit, and LinkedIn was one of them. And the LinkedIn role that came up to me was like a great fit, right? Because they were looking for somebody that does vendor sales, right? So I've done a lot of vendor operations work in my life. So right, like in YouTube, I was building like an events team. I built a sales development team in Google Cloud. But I've also done sales myself, right? So I was an AE, I was an account executive. I did pre-sales, post-sales, sales. And so that became one of the few roles that I applied because I felt like that was such a great fit. Right. So what I did was there were maybe about 3 or 4 such roles that I applied for. And what I did then was like I went the layer deeper, right? I found that it's really important to write a cover letter, because if you've convinced yourself that that's the role that you think you'd be great for, like why don't you just put it into writing and let the hiring manager see why you think you're great? Because I think that already starts to filter out a big layer, because there are probably a whole bunch of people that apply but don't state why they think they'll be great, right? So I think that became one of that filtering point. But I kind of digress, right? So coming back to your question of like how did I find a role, it wasn't like something that dropped from nowhere. I kind of identified first companies, and then when I looked in, though, that was one of the roles. And when I went through like 5 interviews, after evaluating, with different companies, I mean, five simultaneous job interviews, I was like, okay, I think this is the one that I really want to go in for, because it was a good cultural fit. Manager was great, the role was exciting. It was an opportunity to build a brand new thing, and they could kind of pay me at where I roughly needed to be when I looked at my numbers. So all in all, that's kind of like how that role came to be for me.
Thanks, Lionel. So when you applied, did you do what Mark did, which is like connect to someone and like, or did you just wait for the recruiter to reach out to you?
Yeah, so I definitely like put in more, because once I've identified who those few roles are, so I reached out to people that were LinkedIn connections working at LinkedIn. I tried to get some of like my previous bosses that knew people to kind of like endorse me. And then I reached out to the hiring manager. I dropped like a bit of that cover letter, right? But nowadays you don't really need to have a cover letter, because in some of these like application systems you can write like, why do you think you'd be a great fit, right? You put it in a blurb. So those were some of the ways I guess I wanted to show that like I was really interested. But I think interest is one thing, right? But I think more importantly for me was the substance of it, of like, why do you think you'd be great in that role? Because if I put myself in a hiring manager's shoes, with all the talent that's on the market today, I think the question is like, okay, like, but like, why would you think you'll be the most successful person that I should look at, right? So I think if you put yourself in that mindset, that probably helps you to kind of stand out amongst all the great talent that is on the market. And then I feel like the right role will come to you because only you will have all of that X factor contributions that come together. Like in the role that I am, it's vendors experience with sales, right? It's not that usual a combination that I found after speaking to my manager. So
Yeah.
I think everybody will find something like that when they eventually land something.
Let's go to Sumant about how you found this role, and then I would love to ask about cover letters because as a recruiter, I don't believe in them. But you had such a good experience, so I would love to open it up. But Sumant, you go first. Like, how did you find this quantum horizon computing role?
Yeah, I think I'd say very similar approaches to what Mark and Lionel said, right? Like I think start with what you want to do. And I think not to sugarcoat, but to say that a layoff actually gives you the time to really think deeply about this. Because now, if imagine your alternative is you're in a full-time role, and the only time you have is in between your work days, where you're already under pressure to get a lot of other things done. So you have to fit so many things in. Now you have the time to actually sit down and think and say, this is what I want to do. This is what I don't want to do. And then for me, there was this moment where I thought that, okay, I've always been saying in the last few years that I want to do A, B, C, or X, Y, Z. And if I really don't pursue one of those, it means that was just a wish list item and that wasn't really something that I was really chasing, right? So then that helps you like really differentiate what you really want to do from what you don't want to do. So once you have that, then it becomes much easier. Like it's one step closer, but then you still have these large steps to take, right? So I'd say in very similar fashion, like I started looking at this and saying like, okay, how do I make it a process for myself? And I said, okay, strategy twofold. One, how do you increase your top of the funnel, right? So now that I know what I want to do, like how do I know who are the companies I want to join? So I need to find ways to increase that top of the funnel. So I tried a few different methodologies for that. LinkedIn is, of course, the best place to do. It makes it so easy to set job alerts and so on, right? The other thing is groups, right? Like Xoogler groups. There are so many other groups that you can be a part of. It was a muscle that I had to build. Like just going and introducing myself to people didn't come naturally to me. So it was something that I had to work on over time and just get myself comfortable. But going to a few of these, being conscious about it helps you. The other thing that I tried was, and for this, Singapore is a great place. Like there is a tech fest or some fest that's on all the time. All you have to do is go look up what's happening in Marina Bay Sands or in Expo and so on, and you'll find some of those, right? Just buy tickets. Some of them may be expensive, some not as much. Just walk around because now you have the time, right? So you can just visit those places, spend the time, walk around, see what companies there are and see what kind of talent they already have, see the kind of things, because it just helps expand the top of the funnel in an effective way, which you don't otherwise get exposure to in your usual searches, right? So now that you have that, you've identified what you want to do, you've got your, I'll say like just the gamut of companies that you're now interested in, right? Then gets to the part of precision, right? Like now, and this is where to what Mark said earlier, like there's no reason to do a half-ass job of it, right? Like you want to chase something, chase it wholeheartedly. And then you sit down and if there's a company that you want to chase, like for me, this came up through some networks and so on that I was actually a part of. And then through the network, I heard of this opportunity. So when I heard of this, I had that initial discussion. But then the next discussion where I was actually going to meet somebody who would make the decision, I really went for it. I spent enough time doing my research on the company. And there's so much information that's publicly available, right? So there's no reason that you can't do enough research, like do the research of where they got the funding or when they got the funding, who's in the company, what kind of talent is in the company, where did they get the talent from, like what is the background of all of the people who are there in the company, right? Like, and there's quite a bit that you can do. So, and I think that helps differentiate as well from other candidates, because now you've shown through your research and through the interview that you can actually contribute because you've taken that much effort to find out as much about the company, because it also helps you be that much clearer in your head that you really fit that role, and you're not doing this just because an opportunity came up, but you really want to chase this, right? So I think doing that research is really helpful. And network, right? Like I'd say that's a huge learning for me. I think I have met more new people in these last 6 months than I have met the last 6 years. And I think that's always helpful. Not every interaction will lead to something, but not every interaction needs to lead to something, right? Like, because every interaction could lead to something maybe 3 degrees down. But at least have, like, if you initiate that, I'm sure something will turn around at some point. So I'd say my big learnings were that, like, increase the top of the funnel. Once you identify it, be very precise, chase it, and then network with as many folks as you can, right? And I think with all of that, I'm also at this stage now that I want to pay it forward, right? Like things like these, I want to do this. So I think that's a pretty powerful community that you can build up over time. And that's how we'll all find our next roles, and differentiate ourselves as well, right? Like, because if you want to showcase your transferable skills, this is your first stop, your community.
Love that. There's a message. There's a question in the chat, and please let's make this a little bit interactive. What happens if there aren't any jobs available that crosses what your background has prepared you for? Or what if there aren't any jobs? You know, we have the criteria. We're open. It's expanding the top of the funnel, but nothing really quite hits. Then what?
There was a good tactic that one of the team here actually used. So there wasn't a role available for her at the time that she wanted. She found our CRO, found a bunch of stuff that he'd been posting about on LinkedIn, and she sent him a video message on LinkedIn via like Sales Navigator, and made her like story of why she wanted to join AlphaSense. She gave her like investment thesis on AlphaSense, how she was initially looking to invest in the company and then decided she'd actually love to join them. And whilst there wasn't a role, you know, for 3-4 months for her, suddenly once we decided to set up, she was first in line to get that call. And so I feel like I really love what Samantha was saying about, it's kind of like free radicals, right? And how they interact with each other. The more you put out, the more interactions happen, and the more like opportunities come as that, once you become really focused on driving that surge. And so I find that even if there isn't necessarily a good fit or a role at that time, just like with new business, you start seeding ideas and opportunities as a pipeline for yourself that can come to fruition. And techniques that can help you stand out are like sending a video, sending a message, like things like that can get you cut through when you're in a sea of like outreach and emails and kind of generic letters that LinkedIn messages that go out. And so I think conceptually it's very good to like create a lot of activity and try and seed ideas of roles you might want in various companies. And then there are like really clear tactics when you can do it, in the way you can do it. So yeah, just my perspective on if that's helpful.
Yeah. And if I can kind of just like add to that, right? Like I think it's also the learning that I had. I found it was quite difficult to start with the roles that were out there, because then you've almost pigeonholed yourself into like what it could be. And that's when I realized, like, if I start with me and I start to put like, actually, what am I good at? And what do I have skills in, right? So for me, it was like sales, managing vendors, right? Partner management, business development. So like I kind of like listed a few of these that I had good enough skills at. And that's when I mapped it against the companies that I was first looking at, right? And when I saw the roles that they were hiring for, that's when I look at the role and what the description was, and I look at my list of skills, and I was like, I wonder if I could see that. So it became a moment of curiosity, because then you're also timing with what's available in the market, right? Because the last thing you want is you do an intellectual exercise, but then the role doesn't exist, right? To one of the comments in the question. But you also don't want to go the other way. It's like, I only want to work at these companies, but actually you don't have any of the skills. So I find like if you identify who you are, what you bring, what you care about and what you like, and then you can try to find that point where it times with what the market has a need for. And that's where you kind of get in, right? And back to, someone's point around paying back, like that's why I'm doing these sessions. That's why I'm also offering like coaching, like if you like to help to identify like what you've got, it costs nothing for anybody here, right? But I just think it's important if we can try to see what we've got. Because like that's why we're all unique, right? Like we all have special gifts and powers with the experience we've got, as well as the life experience we've got. So that, I guess that was my way of answering the question of like, if there's no job that exists, is if you start with yourself, you might actually find a role. Like for me, I didn't think that, oh, I would love to work at LinkedIn and do vendor sales, right? It was like, oh, I love to work at LinkedIn. That was one of the companies. I was like, oh, they are hiring for, account manager, but I like to build teams, like customer success. I like that, but I also like to build teams, and like vendor sales. Okay, it's like, it's a team that you're going to build out now. That ties in all of the experience I've got. And that's how I went to apply for that role.
Sumant, you have your hand up.
Just a quick one to add to this, right? Like I think Lionel may also agree with this. Not every day is as rosy as maybe the conversation right now seems to make it out to be, right? Like you will have tough days when you're going through this. And I'm bringing that up just because of the question, right? So you will have tough days. So I'd say you should, and this was a learning that I had like maybe a month into this period, right? Like, because if you have built up some kind of support system for yourself, right? It could be anything. It could be family. It could be like just some sport that you have, whatever that is, right? Like you need one of those at least, right? Like, because not every day is going to be a happy day where you end with some dopamine like you would at work. So you need something to distract you and keep you going, because every day you have to start again, right? Like you may not have got replies back from a lot of folks. The interviews may not have gone well and so on, but you can't let that get to you, right? Like, so you just have to get back in. So that's just one I'd had.
And I love to get okay. And I mean, I just a personal perspective, right? I never I wasn't laid off, but I was still looking for a job because I felt very stuck and I felt like I could be doing more, and I felt like I was a cog in a big tech machine. And so I made the conscious decision to go start up and go small. And yes, there's a pay cut, but again, it's kind of like trade-offs, right? So with a smaller company, it's more on ESOP, it's less on cash. But what I'm doing, what I'm learning is just so phenomenal, and I will never, it'll be very difficult to get that experience. So it's very similar to what Mark was saying earlier, because my background is very much weighted towards talent acquisition, but now I'm going for a general HR role. So for all the companies that I applied to, and I applied to many, and none of them even got back to me, because they were like, no, you're a recruiter. Nope, all you're a recruiter. And I was like, okay, fine. So when I got this opportunity, I got it because I was in my elevator in my condo, and I saw my neighbor with a bag that says in Dallas. And I said, oh, do you work in Dallas? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, you have an HR director role open. So again, it's like communication, it is conversations. So 100% on everyone, what everyone has been saying. However, I'm very clear about what I can bring to the role and what I lack. So I also brought that to every single conversation when I interviewed. I said, hey, I'm really good at this. I have no experience in this, but it's not difficult to learn. So it's kind of like knowing your strengths, knowing your weakness, being very transparent. And I can tell that this is the right company for me, because they're like, okay, if you're deficient, if you're not great at this, let's give you on, like, let's onboard you, let's upskill you. So it was definitely a right choice. And if they were a company that said, oh, we can't hire you because you've never done this before, then I also know that's not the right choice. Okay, so one question, why don't I like cover letters? So as a recruiter, and Sumanth, you also have experience here. A lot of, let me take a step back. Some of these questions that I'm getting from the audience is, there's like 100 applications to every job role. How do you stand out? And as a recruiter on the other side, trying to get through these 100 applications, I barely have 7 seconds. I think, that's the rule, right? You have like 7 to 10 seconds to go through every CV. And then a lot of the applicant tracking systems for whatever roles, when you upload both your CV and a cover letter, the recruiter is going to click on the CV first. So no matter how amazing your cover letter may be, if your CV is like all wrong format and it doesn't say much and it doesn't tell me about the impact and the change that you've driven and there are no metrics there, it's very likely I'm not even gonna click on your cover letter. So it's not like I don't like cover letters. I have nothing personal against cover letters. I think a strong CV makes it a higher chance that someone will take a look at your cover letter. I personally very rarely click on cover letters when I was in my previous life. But I would love to hear from everyone here. Do you read cover letters? Not all, right?
Yeah, like similar recruiter perspective, right? Like when I was in talent acquisition, similar stuff, right? Like you have very little time to go through, which is why I always say with a resume, you don't have to make it snazzy, right? Like you don't have to add all these colors and different fonts and pictures and so on. Keep it simple, keep it real, keep it short. Like a good resume is 1 page, maximum 2 pages, right? More than 2 pages of resume, I don't think anybody's going to have the patience to go to page 3, right? So the shorter it is, the more concise it is. It's just like the Google search graveyard, right? Like beyond the second page, nobody goes to search for results. So I think that's a good thumb rule to say, keep it short and it's easier. In the same way, in the cover letters, sometimes you see cover letters that are like a page long and then there's a resume that's another page or 2 pages, right? So you just gloss over it and you may not even get the highlights that folks would want you to read. So, I mean, that's one perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I found was, and it's interesting, right? Because this cover letter idea, it came from, one of my ex-bosses who introduced me to a CEO, and she said, actually, when she's applying for roles in the past, she would still always send a cover letter because that always first reduces the noise. And then as we had a discussion around it, and the noise as in most people don't, right? And therefore, if you do, you at least stand out. And as the discussion evolved, it became apparent that it's more around like, how do you land the crux of your message of like why you think you'll be a great role, and how do you get that to land with the hiring manager, right? So a cover letter is one path, but it's definitely not the only path, right? Because it might get screened out. But I would say like, how do you use your connections to then say like, hey, do you know the hiring manager? Or hey, you work at this company, who's the hiring manager? And then use that what you would write in the cover letter as like the crux, right? Like, I think I'll be great for this role because you say you need somebody that does bullet points, and here's how I've demonstrated that I've done it, right? With a few bullet points. So you've matched your experience very quickly with what they're looking for in a very succinct way that AI can now help you also make more succinct. And now how do you get that in front of the hiring manager? I think is probably the goal in my mind. And not only going one path, which is the cover letter path, right? And like, how do you try to have multiple ways to get that across?
I agree. I think it's the multi-thread. So if you like your one bit of communication is CV plus cover letter, you've lost an opportunity. The cover letter can take very different forms. And I love what you said about Lionel, about like, if you think about the hiring manager's motivations and what they're looking for, and also if you think about their objections of you as a candidate, maybe it's about you changing that, like it's a different type of role than you've done in the past, or there's some like shift, it's a new industry or new vertical that you've not worked in. I think it's really good to call those out actually and like be very upfront and like turn that into your advantage it's going to cut through again, where you're not trying to like cover something up and stretch your suitability, but you're going to create trust in that message when you say, hey, listen, I like a bit like I did where I'm like, you're going to see better CVs, but this is why I think you should look at mine and take this one seriously. I think that suddenly establishes some interest of like what it like this person has something that might be quite interesting, and I'll take that forward. But yeah, I think about, again, it's like from a sales perspective, how do you multi-thread, not just use one line of communication?
Yeah, love that. Thank you. I think we're at time. So one final takeaway from everyone, please, just to wrap up this topic of job hunting. Maybe the last 10 seconds on one tip that you found was super helpful to you, just in summary, in your job search or when you're looking at candidates. Mark, you can go first. Just a summary of like, what's your most helpful?
Myself would from the team here, I think it's like just that how you cut through the noise and the channels that you can use. And I think I love the point around network. Like, this is such a small community. If I talk about Singapore, your network is a massive multiplier, and just invest in your network at all times, even when you're comfortable in your role. Constantly invest in your network.
Amazing. Thank you, Key and Xoogler, for that. Sumant, what is your one tip for the day?
I think very soon, like, how do you differentiate yourself from the crowd? Like, there are multiple paths to that, right? Like, but find the one that you think is the most comfortable for you, right? Like, if it is on LinkedIn that you need to reach out to the others in the company, like, that's another path for us to take. So I'd say finding your niche and how you can differentiate yourself, that could look very different from each of us. But knowing that, I think that's pretty helpful.
Awesome. And Lionel, last but not least.
Yeah, I would say take the time to know yourself and like what you bring, because then that can go multiple ways. Not only does it help, with the crux of how it gets to a hiring manager, but it also helps with your narrative, right? Like in interviews or with whoever you've met, because it shows that you've thought about it, and just you having that already done, it helps you get into the job hunt a lot more confidently as well, right? To Suman's point, it's not always going to be easy, but if you keep going back to, well, I know these are my strengths, it always gives you that boost to say like, well, okay, maybe not every job is for me, but I know like roughly these are the areas that I can add value, and then it's just about finding the right one that comes from there.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the attendees. Thank you to the panelists.